The wind howled like a wounded wolf across the northern mountains. Snow fell in thick, choking sheets, covering the jagged cliffs and frozen trees in a blanket of cold white. Somewhere within this frozen wasteland, a small figure struggled against the storm, her cloak torn and soaked, her boots nearly useless in the deep snow. Her name was Leora, the youngest daughter of a king who had long since ceased to care for her. They had called her names, whispered cruel words behind her back, and now they had done the unthinkable. Left her in the snow to die. The cold bit into her skin, making her shiver uncontrollably. Her arms trembled as she tried to hug herself for warmth. Her body ached, her legs felt like lead, and every breath she drew came as a sharp, icy sting. She remembered the look in her father's eyes as he had turned away, cold and unfeeling. "She is worthless," he had said. "She will bring shame if she lives. Let the snow take her." Leora's heart still ached from his words more than the cold ever could. She had hoped somehow that he would change, that someone, anyone, would defy the king's cruel command. But no one had. Not her sisters, not the servants, not even the palace guards. She was utterly alone. As she stumbled through the snow, her thoughts turned inward. Why am I so different? She wondered. She had always been larger than the other princesses, slower, clumsier in their eyes. But she had kindness, a heart full of love, and the courage to dream beyond the walls of her father's cold palace. Still, those things had counted for nothing. They had left her here, a girl with no strength in their eyes, destined to vanish into the white emptiness. The storm grew stronger, whipping her hair into her face, filling her mouth with the bitter taste of ice. She fell to her knees, snow sticking to her tears. Her vision blurred. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as though the snow itself were determined to bury her. A sudden gust of wind nearly threw her off her feet. She felt herself sliding down a small slope, barely catching herself on a jagged rock. Her heart pounded not just from exertion, but from the fear that this might truly be the end. She huddled against a tree, hoping to find shelter. Any shelter. The bark scraped her hands as she clutched it, her fingers numb and stiff. She whispered to herself, trying to believe in something, anything. "I will survive. I will survive." The words sounded weak even to her own ears, yet she clung to them as if they were a lifeline. The shadows between the snow-laden trees seemed to move. Leora froze, her breath visible in the cold air, forming tiny clouds around her lips. For a moment she thought she imagined it, but then the shadows shifted again, too deliberate, too precise to be merely tricked by the wind. Something or someone was watching her. Panic prickled along her spine. What if it's another hunter, she thought, recalling the cruel men who sometimes wandered the mountains seeking lost travelers. But the figure that emerged from the snow was not human. Tall, strong, a presence that made her feel both terrified and oddly safe. His cloak swirled around him like a shadow itself, blending with the storm. His eyes glowed faintly red, cutting through the white haze. "You should not be here," the figure said, his voice low and commanding, yet carrying a strange warmth that made her shiver for a reason she did not understand. I can't go back," Leora stammered. Her teeth chattered, and she clutched her arms around herself. "They left me. To die." He did not move closer at first. Instead, he studied her silently, as though weighing her soul. Then, without another word, he reached out. His hands were cold, but not painful. They were strong, enveloping her with a protection she had never felt before. In an instant, he lifted her from the snow with ease. The world tilted, but somehow, against his broad chest, she felt a pulse of warmth. "Hold on," he said, his eyes piercing hers. "You will not die tonight." Leora's mind reeled. Who are you?" she whispered. "I am Kale," he replied simply. There was something ancient in his tone, something that carried centuries of weight and power. "And you are coming with me." She wanted to protest, to ask questions, but the exhaustion, the cold and the shock left her unable to do anything but let him carry her. Her small struggles faded as his arms wrapped around her, strong and unyielding. For the first time since her father had abandoned her, she felt safe. A warmth spread through her chest, not from the fire she could see, for there was none, but from the sheer presence of this being who had appeared out of the storm. The journey through the blizzard was surreal. Snow whipped against her face, but the world seemed to quiet around them, as if the storm itself respected the shadowy figure carrying her. Thoughts tumbled through Leora's mind. Is he a spirit? A demon? A monster? But none of her fear could shake the sense of protection that radiated from him. Finally, they reached a dark, towering fortress carved into the side of a mountain. Crimson torches flickered along the walls, their light reflecting in the ice that clung to the stone. The gates opened before them as if sensing Cale's arrival. He carried Leora inside, and the cold of the outside world gave way to a heavy, ancient warmth. The halls were vast and echoing, adorned with tapestries that told stories of kingdoms long gone. Shadows seemed to move along the walls, and the air smelled faintly of iron and old magic. He set her down gently on a raised platform, near a pool of water that shimmered unnaturally in the torchlight. Leora looked around, her eyes wide with awe and fear. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You are safe," Kyle said. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, enough that Leora noticed it. For now, she wanted to ask more, but words failed her. She had never felt such a mixture of fear, confusion, and curiosity. The man, no, the being who had saved her, was unlike anyone she had ever known. There was a power in him, something raw and unyielding, yet tempered with a strange gentleness that called to something deep within her. Cale knelt beside her, studying her face as though he could read her thoughts. "You are stronger than they think," he said, almost to himself. "Stronger than you know." Leora blinked, tears threatening again. I am nothing," she whispered. "You are more than nothing," Cale replied, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture that was careful, measured, yet intimate. "You have survived what they thought would destroy you. That alone proves it." The warmth of his hand, the certainty in his words, made her heart beat faster. She wanted to believe him, to feel the strength he described, but the memory of her father's cruelty weighed heavily on her. "How could anyone see worth in me when my own blood does not?" Kyle rose, his towering form casting long shadows across the hall. "Rest now," he said. "The storm is not done, and neither are the dangers that follow. But tonight you live. That is enough." Leora nodded, too exhausted to speak, and curled into herself on the raised platform. She felt the ache of the cold begin to fade, replaced by a strange, calming presence. For the first time in her life, she did not feel entirely alone. As she drifted into a fragile, uneasy sleep, she thought of the snow-covered mountains, the bitter wind, and the hopelessness that had gripped her. But now at least there was a light in the darkness, a presence she could not understand, yet one she would follow, willingly or not. Outside, the storm raged on, fierce and unrelenting. But inside the fortress, where shadows danced along the walls, Leora felt the stirrings of something she had never known: hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of a story that would change everything. And in the deepest corners of the fortress, Cale watched over her, silent and vigilant, aware that her survival tonight was only the first chapter of a fate neither of them could yet comprehend. Cliffhanger. As the snowstorm howled beyond the stone walls, a faint shadow moved in the distance, another presence, watching, waiting. Something ancient, something hungry. Leora had survived the blizzard, but the true danger was only beginning. The fortress was alive with shadows. The walls seemed to breathe, the ancient stones whispering secrets of centuries long past. Leora awoke slowly, the warmth of the blankets wrapping her like a gentle embrace. Her body was stiff, and every movement reminded her of the snowstorm outside. But it was not the cold that made her tremble. It was the uncertainty of what awaited her in the mysterious fortress of Kyle, the being who had saved her life. She sat up cautiously, glancing around. The room was vast, adorned with tapestries of battles and kings long forgotten. A faint light glowed from the crimson torches mounted along the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced across the floor. The air smelled faintly of iron and something sweet, like dried roses. It was strange and foreign, yet it carried a feeling of safety she had never known. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Leora's heart quickened. "Kyle?" she called softly. There was no immediate answer, only the whisper of wind through the tall windows. Then the footsteps approached, steady and certain, until the door creaked open. Kyle stood there, towering and silent, his crimson eyes watching her. Even in the light of the torches, he seemed both beautiful and terrifying. His presence filled the room completely, a mix of authority and something softer, hidden deep beneath the shadows he carried with him. "You are awake," he said simply. His voice, low and even, made her ears ache slightly, yet carried a strange comfort. "Good. You need strength, and sleeping was your first step. I don't understand," Leora admitted, her voice small. "Why did you save me?" "I am nothing. Just a girl left to die in the snow." Her words trembled with a mix of fear and disbelief. Cale studied her quietly. His gaze was sharp, like a blade cutting through the layers of her fear. Nothing? You have survived when your father expected death to claim you. That alone marks you as more than nothing. He stepped closer, his long cloak brushing the floor, and there was a strange rhythm to his movement, precise yet graceful. Do you not see? The world underestimates the quiet, the overlooked, and the discarded. You, Leora, are one of them, and that is why you are still here. Leora looked away, ashamed. I have no magic, no strength, nothing. I am weak. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and the tears she had fought to keep back now threatened again. Cale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He knelt a few feet away, not reaching for her, but close enough that she felt the pull of his presence. Strength is not always the sword or the spell, he said. It is endurance. It is survival. And you have both. That is why you are here, and why I chose to carry you from the snow. Leora blinked, trying to absorb his words. They felt heavy, like something more than comfort. They carried meaning, something she had longed to hear but never dared hope for. For a while, silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of wind against stone. Then Cale spoke again. You will need to understand the rules of this place should you choose to remain. Leora's brow furrowed. Rules, what do you mean? The world you were born into is cruel, yes. But this one, he gestured around the fortress, is older. The beings here are governed by power, by blood, by history. There are alliances, rivalries, and ancient debts that you cannot see, and now you are part of it. Whether you like it or not, Leora swallowed hard. I don't know if I can. Cale's gaze was steady. You will learn, and I will teach you. But understand this. Survival here requires more than courage. It requires understanding, patience, and the will to accept what is true, even when it frightens you. Her mind raced. She thought of the snow, the blizzard, the endless hours of fear and cold. She had survived that. Surely she could survive this strange, dark world that Cale inhabited. Over the next hours, Cale guided her through the fortress. The halls were endless, twisting like a labyrinth, lined with portraits of vampires whose eyes seemed to follow her. Some of the paintings depicted beings with regal poise, others with feral malice. She realized that the fortress was not just a home. It was a history, a record of power and danger intertwined. Do not touch the portraits, Cale warned, his tone sharp. These are not merely decorations. They hold memories, some joyous, some bitter. They are the past, and the past can bite as surely as a predator. Leora nodded, overwhelmed. She had never imagined a place so vast, so alive with stories she could not yet understand. Finally, they reached a room at the top of a spiral staircase. The doors opened into a library, vast and shadowed, filled with ancient books, scrolls, and artifacts that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. A fire burned in the hearth, sending warmth across the marble floor. This will be your sanctuary, Cale said. Here you will rest, learn, and prepare for what is to come. Leora moved closer to the fire, letting its warmth seep into her frozen limbs. She felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her, but also a strange sense of hope. Perhaps she could survive this world. Perhaps she could learn to be more than what her father had deemed her. Cale watched her silently, his eyes reflecting the flames. He saw her fear, her doubt, but also the faint flicker of determination growing within her. It was a small spark, yet enough to intrigue him. Enough to awaken a part of him he had long buried. A part that longed for trust, for connection, for someone to share the burden of immortality. Days passed, and Leora began to settle into the rhythm of the fortress. She learned to navigate the shadowed halls, to avoid the whispers of rival vampires who watched her with suspicion and curiosity. She discovered that Cale's power was not just physical. It was subtle, commanding, and deeply rooted in the history of the world he inhabited. Cale tested her carefully. He observed her reactions to hunger, to cold, to fear. He guided her, teaching her patience, strategy, and observation. Leora discovered that even though she had been abandoned, she had a resilience that could not be ignored. Each small success, each step she took in mastering the world around her, made her feel more alive, more capable, and more connected to the strange, enigmatic man who had saved her life. But their growing bond was not simple. Cale was strict, demanding and sometimes distant, reminding her that survival required discipline. Yet in the quiet moments when the torches flickered and the fortress was still, He would allow glimpses of warmth, of humor, of concern that left Leora breathless and questioning her own heart. One night, under the dim light of the crescent moon, Leora found herself in the upper courtyard, the wind biting at her cheeks. Kyle appeared beside her silently, his shadow stretching long across the snow-dusted stone. "You are changing," he observed. "Stronger than when you first arrived." Leora turned to him surprised. "Do you really think so?" "I do," he replied. "And soon you will need every bit of strength you have learned. The world outside this fortress is not kind, and those who watch you do not forgive weakness." Her heart pounded at his words, a mixture of fear and excitement. I want to be ready," she said softly. "I don't want to be left behind again." Kale's crimson eyes softened. "You will not be. Not while I am here." And yet, even as the warmth of his words settled around her, Leora could not ignore the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, the faint flicker of movement that suggested they were not alone. Someone, or something, watched from the darkness, waiting, patient and hungry. The fortress had given her safety, warmth, and the guidance she needed. But it also carried danger, secrets, and power far beyond her understanding. Leora realized that survival was only the first step. To truly thrive, she would need courage, cunning, and the willingness to trust someone who could destroy her as easily as he could save her. As she looked up at Kale, standing tall beside her, she felt a mixture of fear and something else, something she had never felt before. Hope. But hope, she knew, could be fragile, and in a world ruled by shadows and blood, it could be tested, twisted, and taken away as easily as life itself. Cliffhanger. A distant howl echoed through the mountains, sending a shiver down Leora's spine. Kale stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "They are coming," he whispered. "And this time you may not survive without learning to fight." The sun never truly rose over the northern mountains, but the crimson torches of the fortress cast long, flickering shadows that danced across the halls. Leora had begun to understand the rhythm of life within Kyle's sanctuary. She moved with more confidence now, her steps no longer uncertain as she explored the twisting corridors and silent chambers. Yet the shadow of fear never fully left her, and the memory of the snowstorm outside lingered, a reminder of how easily life could be stolen. Kale watched her silently from the shadows more often than she realized. He observed her small victories, the way she managed the icy stairs without slipping, the careful way she navigated the library's endless corridors, the way she learned to hold herself with a steadiness he had not expected. There was a spark in her that intrigued him, a defiance tempered by humility, and a quiet strength he had seen in few others across the centuries. One evening, Kyle led her to the inner courtyard, a place Leora had only glimpsed before. The moonlight poured over the snow, casting silver reflections on the frozen fountain at its center. The courtyard was surrounded by towering walls, and the air smelled faintly of frost and pine. Kyle's cloak swirled around him as he stopped near the fountain, his eyes on her. "Tonight," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you will learn something important. Survival is not just about strength, it is about awareness." Leora nodded, trying to steady her trembling hands. Her heart raced. Every time Kyle spoke, every time he looked at her, she felt both fear and fascination, as if she were drawn to a fire that could either warm or consume her. Kale moved silently, demonstrating how to sense the world around them. "Listen," he instructed. "The shadows speak. They tell of movement, of presence. You must learn to hear what others cannot." Leora closed her eyes and concentrated. At first, all she could hear was the wind. The cold bit at her cheeks and snow whispered across the courtyard. But slowly, as she focused, she heard something else. The faint rustle of wings in the distant towers, the softest scraping of claws along the stone walls. Her eyes flew open, meeting Kale's. "Good," he said, a rare trace of a smile brushing his lips. "Most do not hear until it is too late." Her confidence grew in small increments. Each lesson was a revelation, a reminder that she was more capable than she had ever believed. And Kale, who had watched centuries pass and kingdoms rise and fall, seemed to see her for who she truly was. Not the girl left to die in the snow, but someone who could survive, someone who could endure, someone who could change the course of her own destiny. Yet even as Leora trained, the fortress's shadows carried secrets. Rival vampires watched her, some with curiosity, others with malice. Whispers followed her from dark corners, hinting at old grudges and ancient debts. Leora did not understand the intricacies of their politics, but she felt the tension, the silent warnings that Kale had promised her she would need to heed. One evening, after weeks of quiet training, Kale led her to the library once more. The room was vast, filled with towering shelves of books, scrolls, and artifacts. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting a warm glow over the cold stone floors. Kale gestured to a section of the library where ancient texts lay open. "Knowledge is as much a weapon as strength," he said. "You must learn to read the world, to see beyond what is obvious. The strongest survive, yes, but the wise endure." Leora leaned over the books, reading the strange symbols and illustrations. Some told stories of battles fought long ago, of vampires who had ruled with wisdom or cruelty, of curses that had lasted generations. She realized that the world she had entered was far older and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. As she read, Kale watched her from across the room. There was a tension between them, subtle but undeniable. His gaze lingered on her in moments when she did not notice, and she found herself glancing at him, heart pounding, wondering if he felt the same pull she did. It was not love, not yet, but something deeper. A connection forged in danger, trust, and the recognition of strength in another. Days later, that connection was tested. A warning came from the fortress's outer walls. Movement, figures cloaked in darkness, approaching. Leora and Kale stood together in the upper courtyard, the wind whipping snow around them like silver dust. "They are near," Kale said, his voice low. "You must be ready." Fear surged through Leora, but it was accompanied by determination. She had learned, she had trained, and she was no longer the frightened girl left in the snow. She squared her shoulders and nodded. The first shadow moved, gliding across the walls with a predator's grace. Leora's heart raced, but she remembered Kyle's lessons: awareness, patience, understanding the shadows. She lifted her chin, meeting the approaching threat with steady eyes. Kale moved beside her, fluid and silent, his presence anchoring her. Together, they confronted the intruders, their movements synchronized in a dance of power and precision. Leora realized in the heat of the moment that she trusted him completely, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The shadows withdrew as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the swirling snow. Leora's breath came in ragged gasps, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "You did well," he said. "Better than I expected." Leora could not hide the small, victorious smile that crept across her face. For the first time in her life, someone had recognized her strength, and it felt exhilarating. But as the adrenaline faded, a new fear arose. Kale's expression darkened, his crimson eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "They will return," he said quietly. "Stronger, smarter, and next time, you may not survive without more than courage." Leora looked at him, her mind racing. "Then I will learn," she said firmly. "I will not be left behind again." Kale's gaze softened just slightly, and he nodded. "Good. That is what I need you to understand. Strength alone is not enough. You must learn patience, awareness, and the will to endure even when hope seems lost." In the following days, Kale continued her training, but now their interactions carried a new tension. Every lesson, every touch, every shared glance carried an unspoken intimacy. Leora found herself drawn to him, curious about the being who had saved her life and now demanded so much of her mind and body. Kyle, in turn, found himself intrigued by her spirit, her resilience, and the spark of defiance that refused to die even under the weight of centuries-old shadows. One night in the quiet of the library, Kyle spoke softly. "You have changed since you arrived." Leora looked up from the book she had been reading, surprised. I hope so." "You have grown stronger, wiser, and braver," he continued. "But there is still more to learn, and more dangers await. The world outside this fortress is not kind, and the enemies you have already sensed are only the beginning. Leora swallowed hard. She had come so far from the snow, from the fear of abandonment, from the icy loneliness of being left to die, but she knew he was right. The fortress had given her safety and strength, but the shadows beyond its walls were patient and relentless. As she left the library that night, walking through the moonlit courtyard, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she had survived not because someone had saved her, but because she had begun to fight for herself. And Kyle, watching silently from the shadows, knew that her journey had only just begun. The bond between them was growing, a quiet, unspoken connection forged in danger, trust, and mutual respect. Yet the world outside would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. Cliffhanger. A distant howl echoed from the mountains, carrying a cold, unnatural note. Kale's eyes narrowed, and Leora felt the shiver of impending danger. "They are coming for us," Kale whispered, his voice tight with warning. "And this time the shadows will not wait. You must be ready, Leora, or everything we have built will fall." The night had fallen over the fortress, blanketing the towers and courtyards in deep shadows. Leora stood on the highest balcony, the icy wind tugging at her cloak, scattering strands of her dark hair across her face. Below, the snow-covered mountains stretched endlessly, silent and cold. She shivered, but not from the cold. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was coming. Something that would test her courage and the bond she shared with Kale. Kyle appeared silently at her side, his tall figure dark against the moonlight. He had been watching her, always watching, as he had since the day he rescued her from the blizzard. Leora turned toward him, surprised at the soft vulnerability in his crimson eyes. "You are thinking too much," he said quietly. "Fear and doubt will make you hesitate when you must act." "I am not afraid," Leora replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "I am cautious." Kyle's lips curved in a faint, rare smile. "Caution is wise, but hesitation can be deadly. Tonight you will see why." He led her down the winding stairs to the inner courtyard, where the shadows seemed thicker, the air heavier with unseen power. Leora's heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and unease. She had learned much in the fortress: patience, awareness, control, but she knew she was still untested. Tonight would change that. "Do you remember the prophecy I spoke of?" Kale asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Leora nodded, recalling the words he had spoken weeks before. "The discarded child of snow may hold the key to breaking a centuries-old curse." "That prophecy is real," Kale continued, "and it is now within your reach. But first you must face what you fear, not outside this fortress, but within yourself." Leora's brow furrowed. "Within myself?" Kale gestured to the courtyard's center, where the frozen fountain glimmered under the moonlight. "The curse is old, bound to shadows and secrets. To break it, you must confront both the darkness in this world and the darkness in your heart. Only then will your strength be complete." The words weighed on her, but Leora's resolve did not falter. She had survived abandonment, a blizzard, and the relentless training Kale demanded. She could survive this. Kyle guided her through a series of trials that night, testing her in ways that challenged not only her body but her mind and spirit. She faced illusions that preyed on her deepest fears, visions of her father, cruel and unrelenting, and mirrors that reflected her insecurities and self-doubt. She battled creatures born of shadow and whispering darkness, learning to trust her instincts and the lessons Kale had taught her. Each trial left her exhausted, but also stronger. With every shadow she overcame, she felt a new part of herself awaken, a courage she had never known, a resilience that went beyond survival. Kyle watched from the shadows, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes letting her struggle alone. He had long ago learned that growth came only from challenge, and she needed to discover her own power. After the final trial, Leora collapsed onto the frozen stone near the fountain, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The illusions had vanished, the creatures disappeared, and the cold night seemed almost gentle in comparison to what she had endured. Kyle knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture that was both grounding and intimate. "You have done well," he said softly. "Few could endure what you have faced tonight. Fewer still would emerge stronger." Leora looked at him, awe and gratitude mingling in her chest. I, I didn't know I could do it, she admitted. I thought I was weak, that I would always be nothing. You are no longer nothing, Kale said firmly. You are more than your fears, more than your past. You have the strength to shape your own destiny. For a moment, silence hung between them. The wind whispered through the courtyard, carrying snowflakes that sparkled like stars. Leora felt the pull of something deeper than gratitude, an unspoken connection that had been growing between them since the day he saved her. She could feel it in the way his presence warmed her, in the way his eyes sought hers, and in the quiet moments when words were unnecessary. But the moment was broken by a distant, chilling sound, a howl carried on the wind, unnatural and sharp. Kale's expression darkened immediately and his body tensed. They have returned, he said quietly, his voice tight with warning. And this time they will not hesitate. You must be ready, Leora, or everything we have fought for will be lost. Leora rose to her feet, determination shining in her eyes. Then I will be ready, she said. I will not run. I will face them and I will survive. Kale's eyes softened, a flicker of pride in their crimson depths. Good, he said, because I will not fight alone this time. Together they moved through the fortress, preparing for the approaching threat. Shadows shifted along the walls. Whispers echoed from hidden corners, and the air seemed charged with anticipation. Leora's training, her trials, and her newfound confidence gave her a steady hand and a calm mind. She was no longer the frightened girl left in the snow. She was a warrior in her own right, ready to face what came next. As they reached the highest tower, Kale shared more of the prophecy. The curse I have carried for centuries is tied to blood and shadow. Only by confronting it together can it be broken. And only by trusting each other can we endure the consequences. Leora's breath caught. Consequences. Power comes at a cost, Kyle said, his gaze steady. Love, trust, and hope are fragile in our world. They can be your greatest strength, or your deepest weakness. The words hung heavy in the cold night. Leora felt the weight of the journey ahead, the danger that lurked beyond the walls and the responsibility she now carried. Yet alongside that weight she felt something new, a certainty that she was not alone, that she had someone who believed in her and that together they could face whatever darkness approached. Hours passed in tense preparation. Kale taught her to move silently, to sense the unseen and to trust her instincts. Leora's movements became precise, her mind alert, her body ready. The bond between them deepened, not just in training, but in subtle moments when Kale offered guidance, when he allowed her a touch of comfort, when his gaze lingered just long enough to make her heart race. Then, as the first light of dawn touched the snow-covered peaks, the shadow of the enemy appeared, figures moving across the frozen landscape, powerful and deliberate. Leora's pulse quickened, but she felt no fear, only focus. She was ready, and Kyle's presence reinforced her courage. Stay close, he whispered. We face them together. The creatures advanced, their forms partially hidden by the swirling snow. Leora's training kicked in. Every lesson, every trial, every moment of doubt she had conquered became part of her strength. She moved with Kale, their motions synchronized, a dance of shadow and light, trust and instinct. The first clash was fierce, but brief. Kale's power was overwhelming, yet he did not overshadow her. Leora found her place in the fight, her courage and skill surprising even herself. Each strike, each movement was guided by instinct and the lessons he had taught her. When the dust of the battle settled, Leora stood beside Kale, breathing heavily, but unbroken. The enemy had been driven back, at least for now. Her confidence surged, not arrogance, but a calm recognition of her own strength. She had faced fear and darkness, and she had emerged stronger. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. You have grown, he said quietly, stronger than I could have imagined. But this is only the beginning. The true challenges are still ahead. Leora met his gaze, her eyes fierce and unwavering. Then I will face them. I am no longer the girl left in the snow. I am ready. For the first time, Kale allowed himself to feel the bond between them fully, not just as mentor and pupil, not just as protector and rescued, but as two beings connected by trust, courage, and something deeper, something that neither had yet named. Cliffhanger. From the shadows beyond the courtyard, a figure watched silently, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed faintly, a cruel ancient light. Kale's expression darkened, and Leora felt a chill run down her spine. They know, he whispered. And soon we will have no choice but to confront the truth of the curse and the secrets you have yet to uncover. The fortress stood silent under the pale light of the moon, its ancient stones cold and unyielding. But inside, the air was alive with anticipation, tension, and the quiet hum of power. Leora stood at the edge of the upper courtyard, her breath forming soft clouds in the freezing night. Beside her, Kale's presence was steady, a dark and unwavering shadow against the light of the torches. Tonight, everything would change. The prophecy, whispered for centuries, had led them here. The shadows that had haunted the fortress for generations stirred in anticipation. The enemy that had been watching from the mountains, patient and relentless, was moving closer, bringing with it a power older and stronger than Leora had ever imagined. Kyle placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "This is it," he said, his voice low but commanding. "You have trained, endured, and faced your fears. Now we confront the heart of the curse." Leora nodded, her heart pounding yet steady. She had grown from the frightened girl abandoned in the snow into someone capable of facing darkness. And now, with Kale beside her, she felt a strength she had never known. From the shadows, the enemy emerged, a figure cloaked in black, taller than any human, radiating a chilling aura of power. Its eyes glowed faintly, crimson and cold, and a sense of dread washed over the courtyard. Leora felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the culmination of every trial, every fear, and every shadow. Kale stepped forward, moving like liquid darkness, his gaze fixed on the figure. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made the air itself tense. The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion. "She carries the key," it said, its voice a whisper that seemed to echo in every corner of the fortress. "The child of snow, the one discarded and forgotten. She can break the curse," Leora swallowed hard. The prophecy, the trials, the warnings, they all led to this moment. Her pulse raced, but fear did not dominate her. Instead, she felt clarity, purpose, and a strange calm. She was no longer the girl left to die. She was the one who would shape her destiny. Kyle moved closer to her, his hand brushing hers. "Stay close," he murmured. "Trust me. Trust yourself." The figure advanced, and shadows seemed to ripple across the courtyard, twisting and forming shapes that tested every skill Leora had learned. The first wave of darkness surged toward them like living mist, and instinct took over. Leora moved with precision, guided by Kale's lessons. She sensed the flow of power, the rhythm of the shadows, and met each threat with courage and control. Kale was a whirlwind of strength and strategy beside her, his movements both protective and guiding. He did not overshadow her. Instead, he amplified her confidence, letting her know that she was more than capable of standing by his side. Each strike, each parry, each movement was a dance of trust, skill, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. The battle intensified. The shadowed figure struck with power that made the air itself seem heavy, but Leora met it with unwavering focus. She remembered every lesson, every trial, every fear she had overcome. She was not just surviving, she was commanding the battlefield, moving with a grace and strength she had never imagined. Then, a surge of energy pulsed from the figure, enveloping the courtyard in darkness. Leora felt herself pulled into a vision of the past, the blizzard, her father's cruel words, the despair she had felt in the snow. It threatened to overwhelm her, but Kale's presence anchored her. "You are not that girl anymore," he whispered, his voice steady in the storm of shadows. "You are stronger. You are here. You are alive. And I am with you." Leora's heart surged. With Kale's words, she broke through the illusion, her fear dissolving into clarity. The shadow recoiled, sensing her newfound strength. She stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am not nothing," she declared. "I am more than my past, more than your curse, more than the shadows you hide in." The figure faltered, and in that moment Leora felt a power within her awaken, a warmth that radiated from her very core, a force that pushed back the darkness. The frost and shadows retreated, curling away like smoke in the wind. The curse that had haunted centuries trembled before her resolve. Kale reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Together," he said. "We end this, together." Their combined strength, her courage and his power, clashed with the figure. Light and shadow swirled, the wind howled, and the fortress trembled. Leora could feel the energy of the curse trying to resist, but it was no match for the bond they shared. Every trial, every fear, every lesson had led to this moment. She was no longer the abandoned girl in the snow. She was the key, the force of change, the promise of redemption. With one final surge, the shadows shattered, the figure dissipating into nothingness. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the soft hum of the wind. Leora's breath came in ragged gasps, her body exhausted but triumphant. She looked at Cale, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of what they had accomplished. Not just the defeat of the curse, but the journey that had brought them here. Cale stepped closer, his crimson eyes softening as he studied her. "You did it," he said simply. "You faced your fears, embraced your strength, and broke the curse. You are extraordinary, Leora." She looked down, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and an unfamiliar warmth blooming in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Kyle reached out, lifting her chin so that their eyes met. "And I could not have done it without you," he admitted. "You have taught me as much as I have taught you. You are no longer a child of snow. You are the one who reshapes destiny itself." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of their journey pressing against the calm of the courtyard. Then Cale moved closer, wrapping her in his arms, not as a protector but as an equal. Leora felt the warmth of his embrace, the safety and power it carried, and allowed herself to relax fully for the first time since the blizzard. "You are home now," Kyle whispered against her hair. "And nothing will take that from you." Leora closed her eyes, letting the fear, pain, and loneliness of her past dissolve. She had survived the snow, the shadows, and the curse. She had grown stronger, braver, and had found a bond deeper than she had ever imagined. In Cale's arms, she felt the quiet promise of safety and trust, a bond forged in fire, shadows, and shared strength. She realized that she was no longer the girl left to die. She was whole, powerful, and no longer alone. As the first light of dawn touched the snow-capped peaks, Leora and Cale stood together, facing the future. The curse had ended, the shadows had been vanquished, and the fortress was theirs, not as a prison but as a home. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, hope and trust shone brighter than fear and darkness. And in that moment, the girl who had once been abandoned in the snow found not just survival, but redemption, strength, and a love that had been waiting in the shadows all along.